Hello and welcome to your real estate journey, expert tips for buyers and sellers. I am Dolly Lopez, realtor and broker in the state of Florida and Kentucky. In this podcast, we'll guide you and teach you strategies and provide you with advices for you to make an informed and educated decision in your real estate journey. Today, like every Thursday, I am joined by my favorite real estate attorneys, the VPPs, Leslie and Valerie. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for sharing this weekly segments with our followers. How are you all?
Great, great. So happy to be here with you and your followers, educating about real estate, our favorite topic.
Yep, it is my favorite topic too. So today we want to talk about homestead in Florida, and everything about it. Honestly, like why is it important? What does it do for a client? How do you pay property taxes? How do you even dispute values if they need to dispute value? So let's start. So why is it important to have a homestead in the state of Florida?
So, homestead is super important, and it's also a huge benefit that a homeowner can have. And just so that people can understand what homestead is and know whether or not you can apply for it. So, if you own a property, you're on title, and that is your primary home. And when I say primary home, I mean you're living in that property. That is where you deliver your mail. That's where you have your license. That's where your primary house is, where you're living, where you reside. If those two qualifications, if you say yes to those, then you can apply for homestead. And homestead is great benefit for those who live in Florida because it limits how much your property taxes can be raised, and it also gives you a huge discount on property taxes. Now, just so that we're clear, an individual can only have one homestead at any given time, right? So, and you can't own the property under an LLC. It can't be owned in another name. It has to be your name, and it has to be that you are on title, and it has to be that is your primary home. And then it's a huge benefit because it's a tax deduction that you're not going to be able to see in any other way, shape, or form.
Good. And it is, since I work in both states, there is a huge differences between homestead in Kentucky and homestead in Florida. And you probably all know this, but whenever you are buying a home, you pay property taxes. If you live in the United States, you have to pay property taxes. So homestead, it helps you, like Valerie said, to get some reductions, and there's some benefits, quite a bit actually, doing in homestead exemptions. There are homestead exemptions, like Valerie mentioned, whenever you're paying those taxes. So if you were to pay, and let's walk through this, if you were to pay a property tax, which is once a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If you were to pay, the bill comes in and you have to pay $7,000. If you have homestead, how can that be reduced through the exemptions? Can you walk us
Well,
through?
it's not about the quote that you get and an applying an exemption to that price, right? It's a little bit deeper than that. What happens in Florida is that the property appraiser, they put value into your property and they call it assessed value. And from that assessed value, they apply a reduction of $25,000 per individual that qualifies for homestead into that property. So what that means is, let's say, for example, that the assessed value of your property for the property appraiser is $100,000, right? And there are two individuals that qualify for the homestead exemption. That means that the property appraiser will calculate your property taxes amount in $50,000 because they're applying a $50,000 discount. I don't know if I got confused everybody with a little bit with this. So what means is every individual gets a discount of $25,000 before property taxes are calculated if they qualify for homestead exemption.
So and just to give you an example on that and to make sure that I'm right. So let's say that those $7,000 that you pay, and I'm just making up a number, that is based on a property value of 700,000. Just making up another number.
Right.
So those $25,000 gets reduced from the assessed value. So from that $700,000, is that correct?
Yeah. And then the tax amount is determinative on the assessed value.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. No, it was very clear. I just wanted to make sure that I kind of break it down so everyone.
But the difference of what you're saying is that the appraised value of your property, it's going to be completely different than the assessed value from the property.
Saying appraised value. Am I not? I keep saying appraised value instead assessed value.
Yeah.
Right, because let's say you're buying a property at $700,000, that I will guarantee it will not be the assessed value from the property appraiser, because they have different type of calculating the assessed value of the property. And it will never match the appraiser value, and it's actually a good thing because it's significantly lower than the actual market value of your property. They do it differently, and I think it's to help everybody in that sense, because the calculation, they can change the calculation. It's been there for decades and decades. But what they can do is do an assessed value that it's not as quite hopeful than it is the property appraiser.
Okay. I think I was just misusing my words, and I kept thinking that I was saying assessed value rather than the appraised value. Anyways, good. So you also mentioned that it limits the amount of taxes that it can be raised by in every year. Is that right?
That is correct. So every year you're going to see that there's going to be adjustments done to property taxes. And usually the adjustments are going to be dependent on where the property is located. So depending on where the property is located, you may have ad valorem and non-ad valorem taxes, which usually include your garbage disposal, maybe fire departments, county fees, which also include public schools and all that fun stuff. So that every so often, you're going to see every year, there's going to be a slight increase in that. Homestead exemption protects you from how much of that increase can possibly affect you personally in your taxes.
Gotcha. Okay. So it actually just limits, so you cannot just jump from one year to another year, like.
And let me make something a little more clear, because I think that now that you're saying jump from one year to another, when you buy the property,
that was going to be my next question. Whenever you buy a property, that the taxes are so
when you buy a property, and let's say you're buying a property, for example, from someone who's owned that property for 45 years. They've been living in there for 45 years. They've never sold it. They're going to sell it to you. And when you're estimating what the cost of the taxes are going to be, you're going to use the prior year's tax bill. That prior year tax bill, I will guarantee you, will be significantly low. If someone has owned that property for 45 years, we're looking at maybe $1,000 in property taxes.
That doesn't
right, and it's ridiculous. And it could be $1,000 in an area that's quite popular, like let's say South Miami, which is a sought out area here in Miami-Dade County. And if that property tax is $1,000, your taxes, I will guarantee you, will not be $1,000. It's not going to happen, never going to happen. It won't go that low. Even if you apply for homestead exemption. And why? Because one of the calculations when the county is determining what your property taxes will be the value of your purchase. Okay. And the value of your purchase is going to be significantly, maybe 100 times higher than what your prior seller paid 45 years ago. So it's very important to know that your taxes, when you buy a property, to take that into consideration. Take into consideration how long the sellers own that property. If the sellers only own it for a year or two, then the taxes are probably going to be somewhat the same. But the longer your seller owns that property, the more likely your taxes are going to increase exponentially.
Gotcha. No, and that makes sense, Valerie. I had one of my agents. He's actually making an offer on a property, and when he was looking at the property taxes, it showed $500. I have not seen in my history taxes so low, and it's because of what you just mentioned. Because that owner probably never even they built it and never even sold it.
Right.
Yeah. And it happens. Like, for instance, my grandmother has been living in the same property since 1968. I think what she pays in property taxes, because the house, luckily, it's paid off already. What we pay in property taxes, and I don't even think it reaches $1,500. I don't even think it gets to that amount. It's a very minimal amount because the assessed value was from her purchase when she purchased property for $35,000. So in the 1960s.
And the assessed value doesn't match that number. They have like the property appraiser has caps, and they have to take a look at several laws, and then from the purchase price it goes down to the assessed value. So that's why there's a big difference.
Gotcha. And also, so that talking about your grandma, whenever, if that's because she's homestead, if the property was not homestead, then what would happen?
So if the property is not homestead, it's still going to be very low, the property taxes, because a homestead doesn't really take into consideration what we're trying to say, like the prior owner owning the property for so long. When the prior owner owns a property for so long, the assessed value, that was what Les was explaining earlier, is always going to be significantly less. And why? Because that assessed value, it takes into consideration the purchase price of that property. And the purchase price of that property, if you've owned it for so long, will always be a small amount. For instance, like my grandmother, her assessed value was, I think, $35,000. So that's a very low purchase price. You'll never see a property sell for $35,000 here. And if you do, I would suggest you run, because there's a huge problem with it.
Right.
Not even a car at this.
I know.
But let's just keep in mind that you only get $25,000 reduction per individual that qualifies for the homestead exemption. And if I'm not mistaken, there can only be up to $50,000 reduction to the total assessed value. So meaning if you have 4 people owning the property, there's only going to be applied the reduction up to $50,000. So the assessed value is going to go down a bit, but it also has a cap.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. So now let's about the same subject. How do people pay property taxes? So they get a bill. It's November, and November 1st, or the first week of November, at least all the bills start coming out, right? And how does people go and pay for those taxes?
So it really depends on your situation, right? So something you need to take into consideration is, if you have a mortgage, you need to find out whether or not you have an escrow account. The escrow account is what a mortgage company is going to be holding on your behalf to be able to make payments like your taxes. So if you have an escrow account with your mortgage company is going to handle making that payment for your taxes, so you don't have to make it yourself. You can be at ease knowing that, your mortgage company will make the payment, and they're likely going to make the payment in November. Why? Because with property taxes, the county gives you the benefit of, if you pay the very first month it comes out, you get a 3% discount. If you pay the following month, which would be December, you get a 2%. And if you pay in December, you get a 1% discount. And then the discounts disappear thereafter. So it's very important that you determine whether or not you have an escrow account. Because if you do have an escrow account, as I said, you don't have to worry about the payment. If you do not have an escrow account, which some mortgages do not have escrow accounts. If you do not have a mortgage with an escrow account, then you can simply go online to your county's website, and whatever county your property is located. For instance, if it's Miami-Dade, you go Miami-Dade property appraiser. If it's Broward, you go Broward property appraiser. If you're in Monroe, it'd be Monroe property appraiser. Just go into that website, put in your address, or put in the name of which the owner of title will be, and then your property will show up. And you'll see that there's a little tab there for property taxes. You click there, and your bill is going to auto-populate, and you can go ahead and make the payment online.
Perfect. Okay. And then let's say, who pays the taxes? Because if you're selling a house during any given year, so who pays the taxes? Who's responsible for the taxes whenever the bill comes? If you have sold the property and you used the property for like 4 months out of the year, and the new buyer lived the property for another, the rest of the year. Right. So how does that work? Who pays for what?
So what happens at closing is that we prorate the amount, right? So meaning the seller will be responsible for the proration amount up and until the date of the closing, and then the buyer will be responsible from the next day till the end of the year. And what means is that we either collect in advance from the seller at closing, because we're getting close to the payment bill that you get in November 1st, and then we give him credit for the remaining of the year that he will not be the owner. Or if it's a, January, February, March closing, you're not going to charge the seller in advance for that many months, but you're going to give the buyer credit for those 3 months, 4 months that he was the owner of the property.
Gotcha. Okay. And last question, I promise. So let's say that I get the bill and I want to dispute that assessed value. Is that an option? And if so, how would I go about doing so?
So that is 100% an option that you have. You'd have to find yourself an attorney that focuses their area of law and property. And when you do, it's basically property taxes is what that person is going to focus more on, because they're going to know, that attorney is going to know how it is those calculations are made, what it is that they need to base those calculations on. And then they'll be able to tell you, okay, your value is incorrect, may be incorrect. We could dispute it. So it really it's really important that if you have a feeling or you just don't feel right when you see the assessed value, or you think that it's wrong, to consult with an attorney that handles that area of law to be able to find out, is it really something that you could dispute or not. Now, the option for disputing is there. And if for whatever reason the county decides that, yes, they have been assessing the value incorrectly and you're due a credit, the county will give you that credit. And they'll do it in arrears, meaning if they've been doing it for the last 3 years or they've miscalculated for the past, credit you those 3 years. Whatever it is the amount should be, they'll give you back that credit.
Good, good, good. Ladies, thank you so much. This episode has been filled with valuable information, and I hope you all have enjoyed our conversation and gained value and insights for any future purchases, or if you have a home and you don't have a homestead yet. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Instagram, TikTok, Google channel. I mean, we are everywhere. And share our content. If you thought that it was valuable, share the content, and I'm sure one of your friends will appreciate it as well. Ladies, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on every single week to educate our clients. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.